He taught with an authority they had never heard, speaking of a kingdom not of this world, a kingdom of mercy and love. This was Jesus, a teacher and healer whose fame was spreading like wildfire. In the heart of Galilee, a movement was stirring. Crowds gathered on hillsides and in dusty village squares, drawn by a man whose words resonated with the truth they had longed for. People traveled for days, bringing their sick, their broken, and their curious, all hoping for a touch, a word, a glimpse of the divine. But his growing influence did not go unnoticed. For every person healed on the Sabbath, for every heart moved by his parables, the whispers of religious leaders grew louder. They saw not a prophet, but a threat to their established order, and they watched, waiting for a chance to silence him. One of the most profound moments of his ministry came in the small town of Bethany. His dear friend, Lazarus, had fallen gravely ill. When Jesus received the news, his response was puzzling. He waited. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. Grief hung heavy in the air. Martha, practical and heartbroken, met him on the road. "Lord," she cried, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Her sister Mary echoed the same painful sentiment, falling at his feet in tears. Seeing their sorrow, Jesus was deeply moved, and he wept. He asked them to lead him to the tomb, a cave sealed with a heavy stone. "Take away the stone," he commanded. Martha protested, worried about the decay after 4 days. But Jesus looked at her, his gaze filled with compassion and power, and said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" After a short prayer, Jesus' voice boomed across the silent cemetery. "Lazarus, come out." And from the darkness of the tomb, a figure emerged, still bound in burial cloths. Lazarus was alive. Shock and overwhelming joy swept through the crowd. This undeniable miracle solidified the faith of many, but for his enemies, it was the final straw. The man who could command the dead to live had to be stopped. The news of Lazarus' resurrection sent shockwaves through Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin, the highest council of religious leaders, convened in a state of panic. Caiaphas, the high priest, stood before the anxious assembly and delivered a chilling prophecy born of political expediency. "It is better," he declared, "that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." The decision was made. Jesus of Nazareth was officially a marked man, condemned not for a crime he had committed, but for the hope he inspired. Aware of the plot, Jesus withdrew for a time, but he knew his path was set. The final, fateful journey to Jerusalem was about to begin. As the Passover festival approached, Jesus set his face toward the holy city. He arrived not as a conquering king with armies and swords, but in humble fulfillment of prophecy, riding on a young donkey. The mood, however, was anything but humble. A wave of jubilant energy swept through the crowds. People threw their cloaks on the road before him, a gesture reserved for royalty. Others cut branches from palm trees, waving them in the air, creating a vibrant, living carpet for their long-awaited Messiah. Shouts of Hosanna, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," echoed off the ancient stones. Amidst the joyous chaos, Jesus remained serene, his expression a mixture of love for his people and a deep, knowing sorrow for what was to come. As he passed through the city gates, his disciples looked on, their hearts swelling with pride, yet unable to shake a feeling of apprehension. The celebration of his arrival quickly gave way to confrontation. Jesus walked directly to the temple, the very heart of Jewish worship. But instead of a house of prayer, he found a chaotic marketplace. The outer courts were filled with the clatter of coins and the bleating of animals. Money changers exploited pilgrims, and merchants sold sacrificial doves at inflated prices. A righteous anger burned in Jesus' eyes. He fashioned a whip from cords, and with a powerful, deliberate force, he drove them out. He overturned the tables of the money changers, sending coins scattering across the stone floor. He released the doves from their cages, their wings fluttering towards freedom. In a voice that commanded the attention of everyone present, he declared, "It is written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." The onlookers stared, some in fear, others with a dawning understanding. He had not just cleansed the building, he had challenged the corrupt system at its core. His bold actions in the temple brought him into direct conflict with the religious authorities. The Pharisees and Sadducees, the intellectual and political elite, began to publicly challenge him, trying to trap him with cleverly worded questions about taxes, the resurrection, and religious law. With unshakable wisdom, Jesus dismantled their arguments one by one, exposing their hypocrisy for all to see. He called them whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but full of decay within. Their faces hardened with frustration and rage as he consistently outmaneuvered them. Humiliated and furious, the scribes and elders huddled in the shadows, their whispers turning from debate to conspiracy. Their desire to trap him had failed. Now, they would plot to destroy him. While his enemies plotted, Jesus found a moment of peace back in Bethany, dining at the home of a man named Simon. During the meal, Mary, the sister of Lazarus, approached with an alabaster jar. It was filled with pure nard, an incredibly expensive perfume, likely a family's entire life savings. Without a word, she broke the seal and poured the fragrant oil over Jesus' head and feet, an act of profound love and worship. The room filled with the beautiful scent, but some of the disciples, led by Judas Iscariot, were indignant. What a waste! They grumbled. This perfume could have been sold, and the money given to the poor. But Jesus defended her. "Leave her alone," he said gently. "She has done a beautiful thing to me. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. By pouring this perfume on my body, she has prepared me for burial." Her selfless act of devotion, he promised, would be remembered forever. This mention of his burial was no accident. In private moments with his closest followers, Jesus began to speak more openly about his impending suffering and death. He told them he would be betrayed, arrested, and crucified. The disciples were bewildered and filled with sorrow, unable to comprehend his words. How could their triumphant Messiah, the one who raised the dead, be destined for such a fate? Impulsive Peter, ever the protector, took Jesus aside and rebuked him, saying, "Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But Jesus' response was swift and stern. "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." He then explained a difficult truth. To follow him meant to deny oneself and take up a cross, to be willing to lose one's life for the sake of the gospel. It was a call to a radical, sacrificial faith that his disciples were not yet ready to embrace. While Mary was anointing Jesus for his death, one of his own was plotting it. Judas Iscariot, his heart darkened by greed and disillusionment, secretly went to the chief priests. "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" he asked. They settled on a price, 30 pieces of silver, the legal compensation for a gored slave. In a dark room, the cold metal coins were counted into Judas's hand. It was the ultimate act of betrayal, sealed with a clink of silver. A man who had walked with Jesus, heard his teachings, and witnessed his miracles, sold his master for a pittance. Though Jesus knew what was unfolding, he continued his work with a heavy but resolute heart, preparing for the final, agonizing week of his life on earth, a week that would change the course of human history forever. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that explores these powerful historical accounts. In an upper room in Jerusalem, bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps, Jesus gathered with his 12 disciples for one final meal. The air was thick with unspoken gravity. Looking at each of them, his expression was solemn, knowing what was to come. He took a loaf of bread, gave thanks to his Father, and broke it. As he offered the pieces to his disciples, their hands reaching out to receive it, he said, "This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Then, he took a cup filled with wine. After giving thanks once more, he passed it among them. "This cup," he explained, "is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." The disciples exchanged looks, a mixture of confusion and deep reverence on their faces. They didn't fully understand, but they felt the weight of his words. In an act of profound humility, Jesus then wrapped a towel around his waist and began to wash his disciples' feet. When he came to Peter, the impulsive fisherman refused, exclaiming he was not worthy. But Jesus gently insisted, and Peter relented. After washing all their feet, Jesus looked at them and said, "I have set you an example, that you should do as I have done for you." But the peaceful solemnity was about to be shattered. A troubled look crossed Jesus' face. He spoke of betrayal, and a wave of shock rippled through the small group. One by one, they asked, "Surely not I, Lord." Jesus then dipped a piece of bread and gave it to Judas Iscariot, identifying his betrayer. In the shadowed room, Judas's face was a mask of conflict. Without another word, he rose and slipped out of the room, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Later, Jesus led his remaining disciples to a quiet olive grove at the foot of the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane. The trees stood like ancient sentinels under the light of the moon. He asked Peter, James, and John to stay close, to keep watch and pray with him. He then walked a short distance away, the anguish of his soul so overwhelming that he fell to the ground. In the stillness of the garden, his face was a portrait of intense suffering, sweat like great drops of blood forming on his brow. He prayed, his voice filled with agony, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." As he prayed, an angel appeared from heaven, giving him strength for the ordeal ahead. He returned to his 3 closest friends, only to find them asleep, their bodies heavy with sorrow and exhaustion. He woke them gently, asking, "Could you not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" He went away a second time and prayed the same prayer, his spirit wrestling with the immense burden he was about to carry. Again, he found the disciples sleeping. A third time he prayed, the agony deepening, before returning to them one last time. "Are you still sleeping and resting?" he asked. "Look, the hour has come." Just then, the tranquil garden was invaded by the flicker of torches and the clatter of weapons. Judas Iscariot emerged from the shadows, leading a large crowd of soldiers and officials, armed with swords and clubs. He walked directly to Jesus and, in a chilling act of deception, greeted him with a kiss. "Judas," Jesus asked, his voice steady despite the betrayal, "are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" The armed men seized Jesus. In the ensuing chaos, Peter, ever impulsive, drew his sword and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. But Jesus immediately rebuked him. "Put your sword back in its place," he commanded. Then, in a final act of healing before his capture, he touched the servant's ear and made him whole. Jesus turned to the crowd. "Am I leading a rebellion?" he questioned, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me." But his words fell on deaf ears. Overcome by fear, all his disciples scattered and fled into the night, leaving him alone. Bound and under guard, Jesus was led to the house of Caiaphas the high priest, where the Sanhedrin, the council of elders, priests, and teachers of the law had hastily assembled. They were determined to find a reason to condemn him. One by one, false witnesses came forward, but their stories were inconsistent and fell apart under scrutiny. Through it all, Jesus remained silent, his gaze calm and unwavering, his dignity intact. Finally, the high priest Caiaphas stood and demanded, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One." Breaking his silence, Jesus replied, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." At these words, Caiaphas tore his own robes in a theatrical display of outrage, shouting, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses?" The council erupted in agreement, condemning him with a unified cry, "He is worthy of death." The guards then descended upon Jesus, mocking him, spitting on him, and beating him. Meanwhile, in the courtyard below, Peter was warming himself by a fire. A servant girl recognized him as one of Jesus' followers. Frightened, Peter denied it. A second time, someone pointed him out, and again, he denied knowing Jesus. Finally, about an hour later, another person insisted, "Surely this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." With an oath, Peter denied it for a third time, and immediately a rooster crowed. At that sound, Jesus, being led past, turned and looked straight at Peter. In that one glance, Peter remembered Jesus' words, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." Overwhelmed with shame and grief, Peter rushed out and wept bitterly. As morning broke, Jesus was taken from the religious leaders to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The chief priests stood before Pilate, accusing Jesus of subverting the nation, opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar, and claiming to be a king. Pilate, a man of Roman law and order, brought Jesus inside for a private questioning. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked. Jesus answered, "You have said so." Pilate saw through the priests' envy. He told them, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But the crowd grew more agitated. It was the custom during the Passover festival for the governor to release one prisoner chosen by the people. Pilate saw an opportunity. He offered them a choice, Jesus, or a notorious criminal named Barabbas, who was in prison for rebellion and murder. To Pilate's astonishment, the crowd, stirred up by the chief priests, shouted for Barabbas to be released. "What shall I do, then, with the one you call the King of the Jews?" Pilate asked, hoping to reason with them. But their response was a deafening roar. "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" Pilate pleaded, but they only shouted louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the mob and avoid a riot, Pilate gave in. He had Jesus flogged, a brutal punishment that tore his flesh. The Roman soldiers then took their turn, twisting together a crown of thorns and pressing it onto his head. They draped a purple robe over his bleeding shoulders, placed a staff in his hand as a mock scepter, and knelt before him in derision, chanting, "Hail, King of the Jews." They spat on him and struck him on the head with the staff. Pilate brought Jesus out one more time, beaten and bloodied, and presented him to the people. "Here is the man," he declared, perhaps hoping the pitiful sight would evoke some compassion. But the only response from the frenzied crowd was the relentless chant, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Seeing that he was getting nowhere, Pilate called for a bowl of water. In a symbolic act, he washed his hands before the crowd, declaring, "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." He then released Barabbas and handed Jesus over to the soldiers to be crucified. The final journey began. Weakened and bleeding, Jesus was forced to carry the heavy wooden crossbeam through the streets of Jerusalem. The soldiers pushed him onward, their mockery relentless. The weight was too much. He stumbled and fell. Seeing that he could not continue, the soldiers seized a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, and compelled him to carry the cross behind Jesus. A group of women followed, weeping loudly for him. Jesus turned to them, his voice weak but clear. "Daughters of Jerusalem," he said, "do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Finally, they reached their destination, a barren hill outside the city walls called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Here, the final act of this divine tragedy was about to unfold. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that explores these profound historical events.